Superhighway, and welcome to episode 6 of the Nail the Recruiting Process podcast. My name is Jared Zeidman. I'm decked out in my tie-dye WNBA hoodie because the All-Star game this weekend was absolutely bananas, and I hope we find ways to keep going with that format, and I hope other professional sports leagues were taking notice, because that is what every All-Star game should look like. That was insane. And props to Enrique Ogunbowale for properly penning a revenge letter for not making Team USA. That was just an unbelievable showcase, an unbelievable game. And any of the people that are delivering hyperbole, I think Team USA is going to be just fine in the Olympics. That's a great exhibition game against great talent. I think they're going to be okay. Nonetheless, before we dive into a great interview that we have today, I want to quickly answer a question that came directly from a recruit via email. This is a recruit that is sophomore aged, and she started filling out recruiting questionnaires, and in response, she's been invited to a lot of camps. And her questions to me was, how do I really decide what camps are worth it to me and what camps are not worth it to me, and which ones should I go to and which ones should I prioritize? So let me start by saying camps are great. They can be very valuable in your recruiting process. And that said, between the price of them and how much time you don't have infinite amounts of time. You obviously can't go to all of them. So it would make sense to prioritize camps in a specific way. Here would be the way that I advise you to prioritize. I would suggest that you go to camps where you already have relationships and have been communicating with that school's coaching staff. Here's my reasoning there. What tends to happen with camp invitations is, colleges do run camps, even the camps that are great, they still run them to make money, right? So once you've filled out a recruit questionnaire or reach out to a coach requesting an eval, that coach now has your email address and you might get invited to a camp. So the way that you know that it will be a better personal experience for you, because any camp that's run by reputable coaching staff will be good just in terms of the quality. But to get the most out of the experience as a recruit, you want to go to the ones where the first correspondence you hear back from that coach isn't the coach inviting you to the camp. You want to be a coach where you already have a relationship, where you already know a little bit about the school, a little bit about the team, because even though there are some success stories where you hear people be like, I just went to this camp with a chip on my shoulder and nobody knew who I was and I showed out, that happens far less often than you think it would. Because these coaches, especially at higher academic institutions at the non-scholarship level and at the Ivies and the higher academic D1s, these schools are intentionally steering their top recruits to the camp so that they can play with other really good talent, get a feel for what a day in the life of being an athlete on that campus is like, and kind of run through a practice day for that team. So if what I just described to you sounds like an experience that you're already having with some schools, prioritize going to camps at those places. If you're really looking to go like cannonball into a camp where you don't have relationships with anybody, I would also strongly encourage you to look for showcase camps, like academic showcases. Hoop Mountain is known for doing these. There's other groups on the West Coast that do these, where you go to the camp and the camps are actually staffed by a group of different college coaches. Again, that's another way to just emphasize bang for your buck. But camps can be great. And by no means am I discouraging you going to camps. But since you can't go to all of them, you should definitely prioritize going where the heat is. One last thing about camps before we move on. I saw some really bad advice being given out on social media. Unfortunately, it was actually being given out by someone that runs a recruiting service. I'm not looking to start beef with them, but I'm going to call out something that's misinformation. They posted on their social media page that a school isn't really interested in you unless they waive the cost of attendance for your camp. Just so you are aware, you should not be looking for that to happen. That is an NCAA violation. It is an NCAA violation for a school to create an inequitable experience in the recruiting process. So do not look for someone to be waiving the cost. Instead, use your money wisely. All of these cost money. Go to the ones where you have the best place relationships and can get the best bang for your buck. And good luck, because every time I either ran a camp or coached at a camp, we recruited someone successfully from that camp. So camps can absolutely be a driver. in your recruiting process, and good luck to you. But there are other ways that you can get recruited as well. And my guest is here to talk about all those. So it's very important to me as we do this podcast that you aren't just hearing from coaches and you aren't just hearing from surrounding members of the basketball community. Peer leadership is hugely important. We know that as coaches better than anybody. Our success is player-led. So it's really important to me that you hear from players who I think nailed the recruiting process. And today, we're going to be hearing from someone who I think nailed the recruiting process twice. Today, you're going to meet Vannessa Garrelts. Vannessa Garrelts is an awesome young lady who I had the opportunity to coach during a graduate transfer year when she transferred into Canisius. But before she was there, she was playing for Miami University in Ohio, the Redhawks. She was a heavily recruited point guard out of high school, and she's going to talk about what ultimately led her to make her choice at Miami, and then some interesting twists in the road. Her original head coach took a different job, so she played for two head coaches during her time at Miami, and her role for each of those head coaches looked very different. Flash forward to right before she comes to Canisius, she thinks she's completely done. But this weird small world thing that is the basketball community ties her to Canisius. Coach Sahar Nusebe, who you met in episode 1, was Vanessa's assistant coach at Miami of Ohio for 2 years. When I was working with Coach Sahar at Canisius, we had a few very talented ball handling guards, but none of them really fit that quarterback, point guard, play runner mentality that we were looking for. Ness was a perfect fit for us. We had no idea if Ness wanted to keep playing basketball after her time at Miami finished. So when we found out that she had 1 year of eligibility left and she was still interested in playing, we got on her pretty good. No pun intended, we were watching her like hawks. Our staff kept an eye on her, kept an eye on the way she played, and then really made an effort to build relationships with her in the offseason. Now, here's where I think Ness is so valuable. As a coach who's been doing it for 15 or so years, there's a strategy that I have when I'm on the phone. I usually do like a 15-minute introductory call. I have typical questions that I like to ask to see if I'm going to be on the same wavelength with the recruit. And Ness had different plans. Ness was so keen on what she wanted if she was to do this again, that she and I actually spent 90 minutes on our introductory phone call just learning about each other. We probably only talked about basketball for 20 minutes of the call. And the first impression I had of Ness immediately was, wow, she's really mature. She really knows what she wants. And you're going to hear a lot about Ness's life experiences, both the highs and the lows. She's very open and transparent in this interview that made her the way that she is. But you're also going to learn something really important, which is, much like the game itself, this process rewards what you put into it. The more you put into this process, the more you get out. The more questions you ask, the more you gauge what your support system is going to look like, the more likely you're going to get it right. And even as things started changing during her time in Miami, you're going to hear her talking about how important her teammates were and how important it was actually that she found the right place the first time around. Very rarely do you meet somebody that found the right place twice. Now, what I can say before we get started with this interview is, did we accomplish everything we wanted to in the year Ness was with us at Canisius? No, we didn't. I think we fell short of a lot of our expectations. But something really interesting happened. Ness has a really successful grad transfer year for us. She makes a tremendous impact on her teammates. You'll get a gauge that she's this type of person. She just comes in and hauls posterior, and she inspires her teammates, and she builds great relationships, especially with the youngest members of our team who are still close with her to this day. And all of a sudden, it's the next off season, and it inspires a whole group of other people who are very similar to Ness, who are looking for different experiences, including players that have experiences winning at the high level, but want a different environment and want to be enabled to act in a different way. And all it took was 1 year of Ness having the experience that Ness had for 4 transfers the next year, Ty Fulton, Grace Heaps, Bree Rossi, and Mackenzie Amalia, to come in as grad transfers and go for a similar sort of thing. I loved being able to watch that firsthand, and I love even more that you're about to learn everything about Ness's story. Recruits, take notes, because she is going to walk you through so many parts of this experience, far beyond the recruiting process, the actual playing experience itself. She's going to walk you through so many things that will more than likely happen to every single one of you. Stay tuned to learn how to handle them like a champ. My interview with Ness starts right now. So I'll confess, most of the time I just look at your Instagram page and how awesome your day-to-day life is. You just travel the universe, Ness. So it's good to see you in what looks like a very beautiful kitchen, may I add.
Oh yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with where you currently are, but it's just good to see you in a one-on-one conversation, not moving at a lightning pace, traveling the universe, Ness.
Definitely. Oh yeah, for sure. I've definitely took advantage of post basketball the past year, living life a little bit more, the freedom and having the taste of freedom again. It's been a ton of fun, and definitely super blessed to be in the position to do so.
So I remember this happened more actually when I got out of grad school. I remember like phasing into adulthood and waking up in a panic sometimes on a Sunday morning, being like, oh my God, what do I have to do? And like kind of like sitting up for a moment and being like, I have to do nothing. I'm an adult now. Have you had that moment a couple times so far?
Oh, many a times. Or my alarm clock goes off and I'm thinking, oh, I have to get to the gym, or oh, we have lifting at this time, conditioning, whatever. And it's like, nope, I'm making my schedule now.
That is amazing. All right, so Ness, you know why you are here. I want to take a moment, and I citing back to the intro, I want to kind of make sure the listeners understand, my relationship with you and why I want you here. I have been talking a lot about recruits who I'd like to see take more ownership of their individual processes. I do not know anyone that models the way when it comes to taking initiative and seeking out conversation and seeking out information more than you. Now, I saw you do it as a transfer athlete for graduate school, but I also learned about your original process, which I, to no surprise, was more of the same. So what our listeners can kind of expect from this is someone who really took ownership of their process. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't twists and turns and bumps in the road, but it does mean that they were able to get all the information they needed every step of the way to get the most out of their experience. So with that in mind, Ness, I want to start where I'd like to hear you share, in your opinion, what your original recruiting process was like. You end up at Miami of Ohio, but for our listeners, players and parents especially, how did you get there?
Yeah, for sure. So I was kind of late to the game of basketball. Played a ton of sports growing up, played basketball growing up, but it wasn't like a dream of mine to be like, I'm gonna play Division I, anything. I just really enjoyed sports. My parents did a very good job of getting me out there in terms of different, competitions, things like that. So it was really my freshman year. We were playing at St. Viator, and an AAU coach was there, Coach Tom. He saw me play in the sophomore game because at the time my high school had a rule that freshmen couldn't play on varsity. So I was playing at sophomores at the time, at sophomore level. And so then he basically recruited me to his AAU team. That got things going in terms of playing, travel ball competitively, zoning in on basketball. So it really wasn't until high school, beginning of high school. And then that following, spring/summer, when those first rounds of college camps came around. First college camp I ever went to was UW-Madison, right in Wisconsin. And after that first camp, I got an offer. So it kind of happened very spontaneously for me in terms of I didn't seek a lot of things out. It, was just right time, right place, right person type situation. And then after that is when things really took off. I think just the fact that I had a lot of momentum from getting a Big Ten offer. A lot of other coaches started to spark interest. I had very good years in my travel ball at the tournaments and everything like that. And so then that's when all the conversations and the attention started to come. And so then my parents and I really sat down and my parents, I think, handled it very well in terms of, is this something you want to do? It's going to be a lot of responsibility
Sure.
and yada, yada, what comes along in those conversations. And then basically once the take that we took on it was that, um, Coach Tom did a lot of advocating for me. And of course, if a coach wanted to talk to my high school coach, they could. But in reality, I handled the recruiting a ton with the surveillance of my parents in terms of the coaches knew who were recruiting me or who were to reach out to me. You know, Coach Tom or my parents were pushing them towards me first to have that first conversation rather than my parents overtaking those conversations. And so I think that really benefited my recruiting process because one, had to get out of my comfort zone of being like, I'm taking responsibility of the questions I want to ask, things I want to know, and also what they want from me, to start building those relationships because relationships are huge for me. And then two, it was just really great for that. Then the coaches to hear from me, and then they can hear a different perspective from my parents. So all in all, everyone was getting to know everyone on different levels.
I think that there is a huge benefit to you owning your process the way that
Hmm.
you did. Um, I also think that there are a lot of coaches that wish more people did that because, a coach really wants to get to know you. And
Yeah.
that really drives, the fit conversation, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But what I want to really sort of almost get a testimonial from you, if it's possible. Like,
Okay.
I have listeners because I can tell you because I talk to them sometimes in my one-on-one consult. I have
Yeah.
listeners that are like, you should have your process be player led. Your parents should help behind the scenes. You should take this initiative. And I can tell that they hear me, but they kind of hear me the way that my dog hears me when I say stop eating that chicken. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So, if you could kind of convey the perks of you
Mm.
being in the driver's seat in your process and the immediate positive results that you felt, what would you tell, a young recruit going through this process now?
Yeah, I think as nerve-wracking as it can be in terms of leading those conversations, especially since it can be a little bit intimidating depending on if you're talking to the assistant or the head coach or depending on how big the school is. I think where it was really fruitful for me, where I got a lot out of it is that I saw firsthand in terms of like being able to sniff out how genuine a coaching staff was. Because at the end of the day, college hoop is a bit of a business. There's a lot of marketing and they're almost selling their school or selling their program sometimes and vice versa as you're trying to almost sell yourself too. And so it really helped me find that middle ground of like, do I think this is something they tell all recruits, or is this, in terms of, since I'm leading the conversation, I can direct it off of their usual almost elevator pitch of the school and ask questions or lead the conversation a different way that may throw them off a little bit or may bring up a different topic that's not talked about. And then that's when you can really get a sense of like, okay, are they actually interested in me? Have those real conversations of like, when I come in, am I playing right away? Am I, gonna need a few years to develop? And then all of those, conversations that are very important conversations to have before you commit to a school.
Absolutely. And, to segue right off of that, you're kind of piquing my interest because you also shared with me behind the scenes as I was putting together my data for the book and I wanted players' eyes on some of the data. And you were one of the people that I kind of trusted with that in an interview. And one of the things that you said about conversations was it's not also just about how the coaches answer my questions. Sometimes it's about what they don't say when I
Hmm.
ask an important question. So as you start narrowing down your choices and you end up ultimately at Miami, what were the things that you were hearing that resonated the most with you? Because ultimately you did want to play for Coach Duff at
Hmm.
Miami. So what did that messaging sound like, and what were the things that were both said and not said that really led you to being like, this place is my fit, even though I have some higher offers and some offers all over the place, this is my fit.
Hmm. Definitely. First and foremost is, I mean, what the school offered too. I liked Miami as the school it was. Like, if anything were to happen, it was a big my parents and I had conversations multiple times of like, if basketball were to be taken away, is this a place you can still see yourself at? Because you just never know what life's going to throw at you. So that was a big, big portion of it, and what Miami had to offer. But then also with that, um, throughout my recruiting process, I had quite a couple of times actually where I had an offer from a coach that was at that program. Coach left, or coach, went a separate way. New coach came in, and um, they either kept the offer that was the original coach gave me, and they were like, "Yes, we got to know you. I want you on my team," which was the case with Duffy. Or in another situation where a new head coach came in and they just didn't think I was a fit for the program and when he wanted or she wanted to take it. And so then technically your scholarship is taken, you know what I mean? And
Right.
so going through that transition of initially meeting and seeing Miami with a different coaching staff, and then transitioning and Duffy coming in and kind of almost restarting that process in the middle of the process, so to say. I think some of the things that were really important was my family situation with my father, and how he had ALS, and where he was at, and where how each year was a transition of life for him, for our family, and what he could and couldn't do. It was, Miami was as far as we could go, but how were they going to almost be a support for me, because that was going to be the first time I was really away from home in general, let alone
Sure.
leaving, with him in that situation and our family in that situation. So that was a big, big thing. And then hon in terms of honesty, it was, I knew I was committing behind a point guard at the time who was a record historical playing point guard for the program, and so she was very straight up with me of what I needed to develop, where I needed to go in order to be at where they wanted to be and where I wanted to be, knowing that I wasn't gonna come in and play right away. So I think just in terms of honesty shows a lot of character to me, and also it's just showed, you know, I always prefer someone to be straight up with me. So I think it's being straight up is one thing, because obviously those are the words spoken, but then the fact that they do it shows the action too, which is kind of the unspoken part of it.
We've talked before, you and I, about the say do matrix, and I think something that I really want to convey to listeners is you kind of approached your process with a bit of a journalistic lens. You were looking for truth, but the truth as it was told to you was not enough. You were also very
Yeah.
deliberate about making sure that actions matched the words, which, I think is a huge, huge strategy, because playing for an inconsistent coach is going to drive you nuts. And
Mhm.
no coach is really going to have you on campus. And when you say describe yourself, they're not going to look at you and be like, well, Ness, I'm inconsistent,
Yeah.
because most people don't know they are, right? They
Yeah.
like, when we talk about ourselves, just like you said with the cell, I'm talking about myself as a coach at my highest aspiration, and you are talking about yourself as a player at your highest aspiration. So, do you like, if you now have the podium and you're talking to young people, how important was going through your process with that lens to you? Do you feel like, had you not done that, this could have been a lot gnarlier?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that it could have gone astray, or, things in terms of even with how deliberate I was with through my recruiting process, and being very open with my parents and being transparent with coaches, you know, my story still did not end up perfect. Like you kind of hinted
Right.
to, I had many ups and downs in my college career, for many different reasons. And so with all of that, I still am very being able to look back and being able to put myself out there the way that I did, at the age of 15 to 18, which you're still, a teenager learning how to be you, technically not even really learning how to be you, but trying to, you know what I mean?
Right. Figuring out
Um,
who you are.
that was like
Right.
a very core part of me really transitioning into, you know, learning what responsibility is with taking hold of my own journey.
I love that. And that's a
Yeah.
really good segue, because on the subject of taking responsibility for your own journey, it's very hard to learn through the experiences of others. You tend to learn from your own experiences. A very
Yeah.
common experience that is a learning experience for young college athletes is they come from an environment where they were a big fish. And then they show up in this new environment and they look around and they go, oh boy, everybody here was the big fish. It's a swimming pool of big fishes. So
hmm
was that a growing pain for you as you transitioned into college? And were there any other growing pains that were kind of like, oh, I didn't really think about this one, and now I'm here?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think no matter what anyone says, whether they, come into as a freshman and start and end up being an all-star, or whether you had the position where I was in and you're a bench player and kind of got to wait your turn and work behind the scenes. Um, there's those growing pains no matter what, because the intensity, the physicality, and the speed of the college game is much different than high school. Like, I will quote me on that. Like, I think everyone can attest to that. Now, obviously, there's different degrees to it. I think for me, it was definitely, yeah, a little bit of big fish into a smaller fish. But I think what I've had a lot more time to reflect upon, and something I worked through, the last probably 3 years of my college career was, and which was a big adjustment, was I had really bad performance anxiety. Now, I had it in high school, and general anxiety, within my life, but I was so stubborn. I've actually had this conversation with my parents and my mom specifically, and I was like, "Did you know, like, I had like anxiety in high school?" And like, because like I never had those conversations with them at the time when it was occurring, and she was like, "Yeah, like your father and I had talked about it behind the scenes and noticed stuff was going on with you and whatever else, but you were so stubborn that like if we were to tell you that you have anxiety, like it would have pushed you a mile away rather than,
Right.
allow us to support you in the ways that they were." And so with that, it was easier to handle my performance anxiety when I was a big fish because I could ignore it in high school rather than come college, that transition of going to a much more talented, every single part of the game is just a higher level up. It really challenges it, and that was really when my confidence came into question, in terms of,
Mm,
it's not that I wasn't confident, but also confidence wasn't a thing. Like, my parents always taught me to be humble, and I think humility is a great thing to learn. I think I had it pounded in my head so much, though, that especially in the area that I was from and being an all-star throughout high school, it's like I had so many eyes on me and almost targets on my back in certain ways that, I was always trying to be on my A game and be the sportsmanship, be a good person, all that stuff on and off the court, that coming into college, you had girls who did not give a shit about that. They're like, "I'm the best player
yeah.
on this
Yes.
freaking court and you're trash." And it's like, okay, I mean, so it's like trying to navigate of like, and honestly, a lot of coaches look for that too, of that confidence. And again, it's not that I didn't have it, it was more so I just showed it in a very different way than a lot of other girls did. So I think that was the biggest, those two folds was the biggest transition for me in terms of when talking about, you know, playing against bigger, better people. Um that, and again, I've always said I wasn't the best on the court. I was just a really freaking hard worker, and in high school you couldn't get me out of the gym. In college, definitely had times when you couldn't, and then again, naturally through the journey, there was times where I probably should have been in the gym more. So going and navigating through all that, I'd say that was definitely part of my transition.
So I also know just from the relationship I have with you
Mhm.
that, you know, the change we alluded to earlier, let's put it out there before we ask this next question. So, Coach Duffy starts ascending up the coaching ladder rapidly. She's not
Yep.
at Miami for a very long time. A new coaching staff comes in, and I know that you have great relationships with these coaches, and more on that later in the podcast. But I also know that different coaches have different visions, and
Yeah.
you did not fit the vision of this coach, your new coach, the same way. I know from knowing you that you really doubled down on your resilience and kind of had a mental shift where you were kind of like, okay, I'm going to make the absolute most of this, and I'll be done my senior year, but I'm going to shift my focus, and I'm just going to go as hard as I can. We're going to see what happens, and what it will be is what it's going to be, and I'm just going to find joy in this.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine that was simple. But I
No.
also but I also know that every athlete in some respect or another goes on a journey like that. And I do not think that many of them handled it with the grace that you did. So if you're comfortable, walk the listeners through how you shifted that mindset, what kind of led to you making that promise to yourself, and then ultimately truly being like, I'm going to give this all I got. And then, forget about the extra year of eligibility. When my senior year comes and goes, I'm done, because you really were there. We'll save the later part for later, but walk us through that for now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So as I kind of alluded to already, freshman year really was a bench player, up by 20, down by 30. That's kind of where, that's where I kind of got my minutes unless, something crazy happened. So minimal experience in terms of game experience. Going into my sophomore year, new head coach, she comes in, she's feeling everyone out. Basically same thing, a little bit of a step up to where really if someone starting point guard was in foul trouble, I was definitely a little bit more of an option, than really just a last resort, but still, under 10 minutes of gameplay, in and out type situations. And that's where it was like, okay, that was a really big mental switch for me going into my junior year of what do I need to do to put myself in the position to gain the confidence of these coaches? Because our point guard was, she graduated. So, it was really, what have I done my freshman, sophomore year? And then what can I build upon in terms of continuing kind of the trajectory that I wanted to go on? Well, unfortunately, my father had passed the spring of my sophomore year. So mentally, that did not necessarily help things and where I was at, especially in terms of being able to compartmentalize was a big lesson that I learned of once I'm on the court, the outside world kind of doesn't exist. And then being able to balance my emotions and everything off the court too. What I don't think a lot of people know is being a D1 athlete is very stressful. It's glamorous, but it also has its unglamorous things. And
Sure.
There are a lot of emotions and stresses and feelings around just your sport, let alone being a pre-owned person and having an identity outside of your sport too. And that's where mine really clashed, when I had such heavy family stuff going on, and then things with basketball still weren't great either. You know what I mean? So then I had a pretty good summer. I was, again, just not in a great mental headspace going into my junior season. Ended up getting the starting position. We played Notre Dame our first game, had a pretty good game, got approval from the coaches that this is what they were looking for. This is something great that we can build upon. We were on a road trip, and then we were going to play Ohio State when they were ranked 2. So really good non-conference experience games, very, very high level play. I unfortunately hurt myself. I messed up my ankle pretty good, which was just not good timing. And then basically it was a roller coaster after that, because there's about 6 to 7 weeks recovery to get back on it. And then it's, all the conversations of, again, off, me off the camera of what can I do? I still want to be a part of this program. How can I be present? Whether it's coaching on the sidelines, whether it's going over film, yada, yada, yada. I'm still very much in this season, in this game. And conversations being told of we want you back on the court. We need you because we weren't having the best season either. So it's okay, I'm doing everything in my power. Then all of a sudden it's a green light. I'm good to go from my trainer. And it just wasn't the response necessarily that was being talked about in terms of being able to get that opportunity to go back on that court. And so then my junior year, again, got some minutes after my injury. Nothing crazy, still a little bit more game experience. And that's kind of when I got to the conclusion of I'm done. You know what I mean? I didn't even know if I was going to take my senior season because COVID obviously was in swing. I had the choice to take, actually all my classes were online. So in my head, I was okay, I can quit basketball. I can move back home and just finish out my degree online, which is what a lot of people honestly did in general, whether you're an athlete or not. And so then that was probably the lowest point I had been at after my junior year, and kind of going and having conversations with my mom and trying to navigate all of that stuff. And then obviously the big inspiration was, one, I'm not a quitter, and even though I wouldn't have been a quitter in that sense, I still hold myself to that standard. So,
sure,
positive
you want
and
to compete
negative.
with yourself.
Correct. Yeah. And so I was you made 3 years. you can bypass your 5th year of eligibility, but why would you not be able to say, stay one more year, give it all your go, and be able to say, like, I did 4 years of Division I basketball, because at the end of the day, that was the goal you made when you committed to this school. And that was another big thing too, is that transferring was a thought process even after my sophomore year, but in terms of loyalty and everything, it wasn't necessarily loyalty to, it was to the coaching staff, but it was more so just in terms of like, this is the school that I chose. This is the program in my head that I wanted to make a difference in. So I still have time to do that. You know what I mean? Um, and then obviously my dad weighed heavy in the decision too. I know he would not have wanted to see me walk away. That would have broke his heart, especially with everything that my parents sacrificed. You know, all the tournaments they went to, training they paid for, all that stuff. It's like, not that they would have given me a hard time about that, but in some degree, it's like I owed them. You know, this is what I was supposed to be doing, and that's just what I felt. So then, like you said, major shift going into my senior year. I probably had the best summer I had ever had. Leading up to my senior year, felt really good with where I was at physically, mentally, so much better than the year before. Still a lot of change on the team, some transfers coming in, 3rd year with the coaching staff. I kind of at that time knew what it was, knew what my relationships were with the coaches specifically. And like you kind of hinted to, I just basically forced them to be like, okay, we're probably not going to agree on certain things. What's the role that you want me to play? And then I just dove fully into that role. Now with that, it was a lot of sacrificing my own pride, which I had already done throughout my college career, obviously. But definitely big time in terms of doing what I can that I knew was going to get me onto the court. Even if I disagreed in terms of what they wanted me to do. And then also what they asked of me in terms of, because at that time I was a senior, I did have experience, maybe not the most game experience in total, but just experience in general in terms of I was on the track of becoming very sure of who I was. I have a lot of intangibles in terms of leadership where people naturally follow me. And so in terms of having an impact on my teammates, especially some of the younger ones, and kind of showing them what college hoops is about. And then too, just in terms of IQ wise, being able to, you know, all the way up until my senior year, I was on scout team. I very rarely got reps with the starting 5 full group. You know, usually it's for people who don't know you, we'll split up the team, and usually it's the starting 5 plus a few extra who will get main reps as your school, and then the other players or practice players of guys, whoever else will play a scout team. Until my end, I was averaging over 20 minutes a game, and I was playing scout team because that's what they needed me to do. Was it right? Probably not. Did I have my teammates come up and, you know, I think that's also what got me through it, was my teammates really did have my back in terms
They
of
saw
like,
you. They saw your work.
100%. Yeah, and that's where I really earned a lot of the respect of my teammates, to know that, you know, I was expected to know the scout as much as them and be able to go perform on very limited reps with the actual things, you know what I mean? And yeah, I just played my hardest senior year, and then I was about 2 weeks retired when the rest of the story continues. So I can either go into it, or you can
Yeah.
open that
Well,
that can.
I want to give our listeners a behind the scenes, because this is how often, truly, like how often does a high school athlete get to hear how a player is thinking and how a coach is thinking, right? So here you are in this moment. You've entered your IDGAF phase of basketball play, and it's paying dividends for you. You're making an impact on your team. You've won over your coaching staff. You've won over your teammates, which is the most important thing. And I know how close you are with those Miami girls. But then an interesting thing happens. And for our listeners, there are a lot of young point guards that don't understand what a point guard actually does. Okay. Being a good ball handler and passer is not what makes you a point guard. And Ness, who happens to be a lifelong Green Bay Packers fan, has a history of being exposed to quarterback culture. And I can tell you that when college coaches recruit point guards, they are recruiting the quarterback of their team. And in year 1 at Canisius, we were taking over literally one of the, by win percentage, lowest win rate teams in America. And our first game at Canisius, we play UB, we lose by 60 points. to UB in our first game. Now that matters. We're going to hold on to that detail.
Yeah.
We grow tremendously in our first year. Do a lot of wins come together? No, but we do win at the right time. We have a couple huge wins down the stretch at the regular season, and then we become the first last place team in the history of the Metro Atlantic Conference to win a MAC tournament game.
Yeah.
We then compete in the quarterfinals against Manhattan, play them very, very closely, but lose. Recruiting starts looking different from that point forward. We've captured the attention of people that weren't taking us seriously before. But what nobody knows is that our coaching staff this entire time was watching Miami of Ohio and watching Ness play. And Coach Sahar puts a bug in my ear and Coach Krista's ear, because it was just the three of us at that time. Goes, I really think we can win her over because she is a relationship-oriented kid and she's a quarterback point guard. And we are watching all these little things that Ness does on the court that have nothing to do with points or assists. And we're like, okay, we're gonna go for Ness so that Ness could be the quarterback. I will tell you that upon Ness's arrival to this team, that UB team that we lost to by 60, we beat in the first game of our regular season with Ness as the QB of our team. And do we accomplish every single thing we want to accomplish? No, because anyone will tell you the sophomore season is the hardest season. But Ness becomes an integral piece in laying cultural foundation for our eventual bigger rebuild at Canisius. Ness, my first recruiting call with you lasted 90 minutes. I thought I was going to be on the phone with you for 5 to 10 minutes. I was like, this kid does not care who I am. She's here to play for Coach Sahar. I am going to hype up Coach Sahar. This is going to be fine. I will never forget the way that Coach Sahar and Coach Krista looked at me when I came back into the office and they were like, hey, where were you? I was like, oh, I was talking to Ness. And they were like, it's been like an hour and a half. I was like, I know. And just the look, I think both of them truly were like, what did he say to her for 90 minutes that like scared her away? So my immediate first impression of you, Ness, is if you're going to do this for another year, you need to be doing it because of your relationships with the people, and you need to have clear role definition. So now let's pick up the story with that table set. Why Canisius at that time?
Yes. So kind of like what you had said, I can picture exactly where I was. We were having a girls' day. It was me, Claire, Ivy, and Katie. We had just got done, I don't know, shopping or doing something, but we're in the Chili's parking lot off campus, right? And all of a sudden, on my phone comes up Coach Sahar, and I'm like, this is interesting. Because we hadn't talked in a while, and you know how the NCAA is in terms of talking to players that you had already coached, and while they're still eligible, lots of rules around that is boring and people don't need to know about, but it's a thing. So I hadn't talked to her a ton over the past year, and like you had said, I had no idea that you guys were watching me, which obviously I found out in that conversation that I'm about to explain, which was really, really cool. But basically she was just checking in, seeing where I was at, seeing, what I was up to, yada, yada. And then basically it was like, so I have like a proposition for you. I'm like, what's up? What's up, Sahar? Talk to me. And she goes, I have no idea if you have interest in it, but I want to throw it out there. Excuse me. That, we would like you here at Canisius. I would like you to come play for me. Now, I don't know if you're looking for your 5th year. I don't know where you're at with that in terms of basketball, but I want you to know that we all are all in with you. And then obviously like kind of left me speechless for a second because I did not expect that in any way. And then kind of we continued that conversation through. I had told her like, obviously I will think this through. I will talk to my family, have the conversations that I need to have. And we'll get back to you, as soon as possible type situation. And I remember telling the girls then how the conversation had went, because they had gone inside and got a table for us to eat. And it was really, I can still I get chills thinking about it, because I still picture and remember telling them and being like saying, I don't know if I'm gonna do it, but just in my gut knowing like, this was how I've always explained it, like, the prayer that I didn't even know I needed answered from God, and I'm a big believer in my faith, and that's very important to me, so obviously this was a sign that he was sending, that I still have more left in my tank. And so then that's kind of where it progressed in terms of conversations with her, meeting you guys as the coaching staff, since relationships were very, very big for me. And like you were saying, in terms of rules, I was very, very clear and honest with you guys of what my journey had been, what I was looking for, but then also what you guys were looking for from me, so that I knew and could get my head mentally right in terms of being able to leave the ups and downs of the 4 years at Miami and really having a full year of, that was a fresh start, but building upon everything that I had become from Miami and taking that to Canisius, especially mainly the good things though, because I wanted, to be able to be present and be able to almost reinvent myself in that last year.
I can't imagine what it must feel like to have to go through a recruiting process twice. And
Yeah.
I have been fortunate to talk to a lot of transfer athletes. And a consensus thing I hear back was anything that I thought I should have done in the first time around, I made sure to do the second time around. And I mean this in the kindest way possible, because I did not take offense when you did this to me.
Oh, God,
I have never, well, I set that up to be like, Ness beat the crap out of me in a parking lot. And I don't know why. No, that's not what's happening. However, I have never in my 15 years of coaching been vetted and asked about role definition. Like when we were talking, and we had a couple conversations, but even in that first one, you were like, I need to know what this team, like, because at this time I was your position coach.
Yes.
And you were basically like, what are our limitations? What are the expectations of me if I come here? How do you want me to fix this? And how are you going to help me? And I was just like, okay, I am being interviewed by this person. And low key, I loved it because it was so clear that you knew what you wanted from this experience. And because you were direct in your questioning, I was able to answer you directly. And I felt, I went from talking to a stranger to talking to somebody I felt like I had known for years in one phone call. And I want to know, especially as a transfer athlete, why were you so driven to want to get those details right the second time?
Yeah, I think because I had been in the position with both coaching staffs, whether it was through Duffy or through Hendricks, that there wasn't a ton of directness sometimes in terms of what was expected, or not even expected, because obviously it's like, you should know you're D1, you should be in the gym, stuff like that. It's obviously kind of a given, but more so it was, I felt like I hadn't been coached in a very long time in terms of even talking X's and O's. Like obviously having my mind wired and being a point guard my whole life, and then come college, be kind of told that I'm not a point guard, but I'm very small and short. So there's very other limited options for me to play.
I'm also not a center.
I'm not like I can just hop around into a different position like that. So I think the directiveness came from literally all of my experiences, whether it's my personal experience and thinking that I didn't get certain answers that, I was looking for through my process with the two different coaching staffs that I had, in terms of my development specifically, and then also in terms of the schemes and concepts that we, we're building the program upon, specifically X's and O's, and then also directness in terms of where do we lack, where are my teammates going to be at, stuff like that, because of also, there was many ups and downs in terms of, we did have transfers coming in and out. So there was significant changes every single year, whether it was within our team and players, whether it was turnover around us in the athletic department or coaching staff specifically. And so with that and constant change, you are open to a lot new of relationships and how to handle and how to navigate people you are very, very different from. And so I also just kind of wanted to know of like, I know what you guys were wanting the culture to be, but what's the culture actually at, because of the girls themselves? You know what I mean? how many are bought in, how many are not bought in, how many do we think we can actually get bought in, how many people are just like, they need to figure out their way, we're supporting them, but they're not with us. That all those different things, especially again, just the mindset of what you guys and specifically what Sahar had expressed to me of where she wanted to take the program for it being year 2, and like you said, it being a pretty pivotal year for a transition year. Knowing all that before, kind of being thrown in the fire. Since I had already gone through a lot of the fire.
Yeah, and I've never actually asked you this directly, but hearing you kind of explain your own rationale, Ness, it sounds pretty safe to say that this was not something you were going to do unless you knew it was going to work for you. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think in a way, it's not that I'm a selfish person, but it was one of the first times I finally made a selfish decision where I was like, I am due and want, and I've worked hard. Not due, I hate saying that, but I have earned this year to be a good year. And so that's why I asked so many intentional questions in terms of specifics that probably are not commonly asked because they were direct things from my past 4 years and experience that, for the betterment or worse, I went through and did not want. I'm happy I went through a lot of the things that I did, but they're not specific things that I would want to go back to, quote unquote.
Sure. This is so important to talk about, especially, listen, 20% of D1 basketball is in the portal every year. So this is going to drive future people's decision making. And I think that it's so powerful to hear from somebody that is very comfortable in saying, hey, if I didn't ask something and it didn't work, I remembered it and I made sure it didn't happen again.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I literally host a podcast with the word process in it. The process of this conversation is more important to me than some of the results. I'm going to quickly gloss over the results because I want the listeners to understand Ness's impact on Canisius. First and foremost, you already heard in the intro that she plays insanely hard, and sometimes in a way that like the perpetual Jewish grandma in me is like, oh, you don't have to dive, Ness. You could stand. You don't have to.
Yeah, me and the floor had a great relationship.
Yeah, but that's how Ness played. And I can tell you that this kid as a graduate student very quickly won over some quintessential young members of our team who, even though Ness was only there for 1 year, picked up a whole lot of habits that Ness had. And all of a sudden, other people externally see Ness and see the journey Ness goes on and see that the keys were kind of handed to her as a leader and go, hey, I wouldn't mind trying that. And the next thing you know, there isn't just one Ness on our team, there's 4. Ty Fulton transfers to Canisius, a former teammate of yours who plays a very similar leadership role as you do. Grace Heaps from UAlbany transfers in. Bree Rozzi transfers in. Mackenzie Amalia, who you played against while during your time at Canisius, transfers in. Yeah. And all 4 of these people you meet and get to know. And that, behind the scenes, ladies and gentlemen, is how a culture is built. So now these young people that got to play with Ness for 1 season picked up a lot of her habits, and all of a sudden Canisius is taking gigantic steps. And these other people that see the opportunity that Ness got, feel seen by our staff, come in, and all of a sudden a completely new, phoenix, if you will, rises from the ashes. So that is my gloss over of the result. That is how important Ness was to us. Sure. Now, I want to kind of bring this back because we're talking about process again, Ness.
Mm-hmm.
It was not all sunshine and rainbows during your time.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
You were leading a very young team, and you alluded to this in your own experience. Like, hearing you reflect on yourself, you literally just talked about moments where you were distracted, where you didn't have the same urgency, where you could have been in the gym more. And now all of a sudden, you are you on 10. You have been enabled to act. You've been enabled to lead. Please talk me through some of the challenges of what it was like to be the veteran leader of an extremely young team with very limited playing experience. How
Yeah.
did that look? I'm going to ask this in a couple questions, and I want to get the best out of you I can. So we'll start just with the first one. What was it like just to undergo that experience for you?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it came with the challenges, which I'm about to get into, but I knew it was the right position for me to be in because as much as I grew in the past 4 years at Miami, having the conversations that I did with you and Sahar and Krista and the whole coaching staff, it was, this next year in the position that the program was in and the girls were in specifically that were going to be my new teammates. It was going to be those 4 years expedited all into this next year is going to be as much as I thought I grew. It's like I grew so much in this 1 year, and it
Wow.
was just crazy in terms of the different situations that I had been in. But I was able to get through all of them because I knew, which I had not had in a very very long time, the trust and belief from you guys. So I mean, a major thank you to you and the rest of the coaching staff in terms of trusting me with the job that I had, going into that summer, before my 5th year. But basically, in terms of handling such an inexperienced and young team, yeah, I think it was how I start, everything. I really threw myself in terms of like, I knew the expectations and the conversations we had of like how I was a leader coming in. But just because you say, this is your new leader, not everyone's going to take that very well. You know what I mean? So, in terms of navigating that, I had never been a leader in terms of like, you have to follow me. I have your respect because the coaches say so. Yeah, like all that take is no. It was the farthest thing from it. I simply was just myself in terms of getting to know my new teammates and allowing them to get to know me. Being vulnerable is something that is very hard for people, but in terms of that was a huge part of my journey throughout Miami, whether it was through my family, things that I had going on, or in terms of different relationships that I was making. And so I kind of took that route of just being very honest with them of what my experience was, even in truth of how much game experience I got, which continually worked its way up each year, but in no way was I ever, a starter throughout the entire season. And so with that, it's like I'm still very, very confident and sure in my ability to play and what my talents and my strengths and weaknesses are. And basically, this is what you guys are going to get. And that's kind of the route I took of being very blunt in terms of I want to have a relationship with you guys. I want to get better, but also like you guys are going to be making me better. Like this is not me coming in as a 5th year and I'm automatically above you. Like if anything, I want you guys to teach me what this program is going to be about or what you not going to be about, because that was what I was working towards more so. What is this program at right now? What am I stepping
Mm.
into in their perspectives?
It sounds like you were extremely open to meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
That's a very shorter version to say. That was great.
Well, no, I mean, listen, I'm not saying that to abbreviate you, but I think it's
No.
important because I think it helps us kind of segue into the next part.
Mm-hmm.
When you say it was a big learning year for you, I think the big thing when you met them where they were, you just realized they're young and they don't know what they don't know.
Sure.
So, what were the most important things in your mind for you to try to teach them?
Yeah, I think in terms of immaturities, it was them, that feeling of they're owed something, especially with the
Mm.
journey that I went through, um, in terms of working my way up quite literally and for playing time and for respect in a way. Uh, on the court specifically, not off the court respect. It was getting out of their heads that they're owed anything or that just because, like, again, it's the difference of the self-confidence. It's self-confidence of knowing what you're doing because you put the work in, and the self-confidence just because you want to be a confident person, you think your shit doesn't smell. You know what I mean? There's a big
100%.
difference in that. And so with that, I think the biggest thing initially was being able to convey how good they had it with Coach Sahar and your coaching staff, in terms of how they're treated specifically, and how how you guys cared about them so much. Um, and then so that was a big thing. And then also it was, you know, finding the balance of you want to be better, but at the end of the day, roles are very important. Um,
Mhm.
not everyone's going to be a star player. Not everyone's going to, be the face of the program, things like that. Like, you have to be willing to sacrifice certain things to be able to fit a position in a way. You know what I mean? We all can't have the green light. That's just very, very unrealistic.
Yeah.
And at the time, a lot of people wanted that green light or thought they deserved it.
And isn't it interesting? Because I mean, I can tell you that I've had this, and I think when I identify, people always ask me, like, what's the biggest challenge of coaching?
Mm-hmm.
I say, I get older every year, and I learn from every single experience I've had. And a first year athlete in college stays 18.
Correct.
And at do you have those memories of, like, you're trying to get them to develop a greater sense of urgency, but you're also kind of looking at it like, oh, I also did that when I was their age. Oh, what do I do? Like, did you have some of those moments of, like, internal tension?
Definitely. I think to a certain degree. I think also due to having Duffy, she ran us a ton. So in terms of urgency, that was something that was never lacked. Maybe in her mind it was, obviously, but compared to other, programs, probably not. So,
Yeah.
some of that stuff was ingrained in me pretty early on. But definitely, there was definitely times where, I would try to help them, and it'd be for the betterment of both of us. But at the time, it's also being able to take criticism is a very important life lesson. And at that age, taking and accepting criticism and seeing it as someone helping you, not coming at you, is very hard. And that's something that you can help someone with, but then they have to have that mindset and that mind switch almost. And not be able to get defensive. And so that's why I always really just fell back onto the relationship building, in terms of, if I had that relationship with them, then I knew I could, one, how to talk to them in terms of what they could handle, and two, then I knew they were taking me the right way, and I didn't have to worry about all of that other, petty stuff that starts the dumb drama and this, you know what I mean? All of that stuff. It was just, we're on the court, we have limited time on the court, this is us getting better. Feelings are put aside at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that because you were focused on relationships with them, it made them more receptive to hearing you in the moment. Even in some moments, because I would see them, even in some moments where they disagreed, they were willing to hear you because they know how much you poured into relationships. And that's something I really want a lot of younger athletes to hear and take away from this is, if you lead from a relationship oriented place, people are more likely to interpret your criticism and your feedback as coming from a place of care. You're not just saying it to say it. You're saying it because you're invested in both of you getting better.
Correct. Yeah. And then there was a very important point of the season where, basically my position group, we were in a very bad slump. We weren't, not like the team as a whole was in a bad slump. We were on a away trip. My position group had meeting with Coach Sahar, with staff, Coach Sahar and Coach Yu, because that was our position coach. And then they had left, and I had kept the two younger guards with me too. And I think the story is pretty pivotal in terms to show how I led. Because again, at no point was I above them or thought I was above them. Like, I quite literally looked them in the eye and I told them, like, guys, everything is laid out in front of you in terms of on the court stuff, what is expected of our group as a whole, not you guys, what's expected from all of us, since we're all playing almost the same position and we're interchanging within each other. But two, basically the ball is in your side of the court in terms of if you want to step up or not in terms of leadership, because I can't do this alone. At no point did I want to be the sole leader of this team. It was trying to make others look in the mirror and see I could do this if I want to, and quite literally the coaches are asking me to, you know what I mean? So throughout the whole season, it was really, really interesting to see you guys specifically as coaches challenge certain players, and then me knowing some of the behind the scenes, and in my own perspective from a player to player, challenging certain players to see who was in it for the betterment of the team and who was in it for themselves. Because it's hard for me just with the person and the teammate that I am, that if any teammate ever looked me dead in the eye and said, I need your help right now, I'd be like, what the hell can I do? Where are
Right.
you at? What do you need me to do? And that just wasn't the response I got. It was, you know, I got a response, and I continued throughout the season, which is details we don't have to get into. But it's like, again, like, I'm at a low point. I need you guys to pick up some of the stuff that I just can't pick up right now. And we're in the middle of the season, and I get there's so many other things going on, but this is me being as candid as I am with you guys right now, that like I am exhausted at a point of the season where I should not be this exhausted yet. You know what I mean?
Right. And you're trying to enable them to act. You're trying to level with them. You're trying to meet them what they are. And this
Yeah.
is, if you want an ultimate thing, because this is the last question I really want to ask you about your playing time, because this is the reality of it. A lot of young players on that team actually did hear your message loud and clear, and did hear the message of the coaching staff loud and clear. And the way I want to close the kind of the book on your basketball career, because I think this is so interesting, is people grow at their own speeds, right? You talked
Mhm.
about your process and your growth process. Well, let's flash forward. This past summer, we thought we were going to be in a really good spot at Canisius. No one else did, because even though it took a little bit longer than we wanted to, our young gunners internalized the message. So now let's flash forward a season, and I really want to pick your brain about this because it's important to me.
Mhm.
Adrian Lamora takes a giant step forward. CC
Mhm.
Aleko takes a giant step forward. Brooklyn Thrash takes a giant step forward. Athena Lexa takes a giant step forward. And these four young kids maybe didn't do everything you wanted in the moment. And we all realize, with the benefit of hindsight, nobody does. But they heard you. They still have very connected relationships with you. What was it like for you to watch them as someone from a relationship standpoint that poured into them in that 1 year? What was it like for you to watch that this past year?
Yeah. No, yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I was tuned in to basically almost every single game. It was really, really cool to see them basically, in terms of some of the growth that was happening last year, see them expand on it, but then also see them develop things on their own, obviously, from the time that I was gone, and I, didn't know what they were working on or anything like that. See them step in with that. And, even with all of them, there's, a couple I'm closer with, and some that I'm not necessarily the closest with. But I think in terms of whether and the whole group as a whole, whether they agreed or disagreed in terms of some of the things that I said and did, I think it ultimately pushed them to realize that, they have the mind to think on their own, to make choices on their own. That's the whole point of it, is like, I didn't need you to agree with me. I needed you to hear me and then decide what to do with that, essentially, rather than be in that middle ground of like, not taking responsibility in terms of your work, in terms of the scout you're covering, whatever the film you're doing, whatever you're pouring into basketball. So it was awesome to see them succeed in really take major steps from, their freshman to sophomore to junior year.
And it was, I mean, like some proud Papa Bear stuff. I remember texting you during some of the
Yeah.
closing games down the stretch. You and I are both watching on TV, and it was awesome to watch. And I think there's something that you just summarized so perfectly, Ness, which is, I'm not asking you to do this because it's me telling you to do this and do it
Yeah.
for me. I'm asking you
No.
to do this because I lived it. And
Correct.
you have a shot at learning from me and growing quicker than I did. And I always think it's
Mm-hmm.
cool. To your point, they didn't do anything because you told them to do it. They figured it
Yep.
out on their own. They got there, they started fighting their own battles, they developed their own autonomy, and they started crushing it. And now I think
Correct.
they're
Yeah.
gonna I think those four are gonna continue crushing it
I
in
agree.
years
100%.
to
100%.
come. So Ness, my last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
There are thousands of young Vannessa Garrelts out there. Thousands. They want to play college basketball at wherever level they want to. The perspective that your experiences have given you, I think, is significantly beyond your years in terms of wisdom.
Mhm.
So it's important for me to ask you this. If you're navigating one of those young Nesses through the recruiting process
Mhm.
right now,
Mhm.
what is your advice to them?
Yeah. I think my advice to them would be as directive as I thought I was being, and I'm very proud of taking responsibility of my journey at such a young age, specifically at the start of the recruiting process. I think I would even try to challenge myself to be even more ballsier to challenge the coaches in terms
Okay.
of, again, get away from that business proposition of, that elevator pitch of this is what's so great, this is the glamorous stuff, this is yada, 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 and this is where you're great, and just be like, shoot me straight. Where do you see me fitting in with this program? What things do I need to work on? What things do I excel in? Where do you think like I can fit right away? And kind of go from there. Because if I really think about my time and what was just, again, amazing and very refreshing about the coaching staff and Sahar's coaching staff when I stepped into my 5th year was the fact that that directedness was there in terms of what you guys needed from me, what I needed from you. And then again, just the fact that you guys wanted to coach me, because that's really the only thing that I really, really yearned for, was just to be coached again. And that's why my 5th year was just so impactful, because it had been a really long time since I had coaches who believed in me the way that you guys did. And so being able to, if a recruit or, old me could sense a little bit better in terms of if a coach truly believes in you or not, that is something that I would really, really zone in, because all the other stuff will work itself out if you can start that relationship on the foundation of trust and knowing that that coach actually does envision you there. It's not, you're not just a stepping stone for something or someone else.
So Ness was one of the transfer athletes that helped me develop that core curriculum, the 3 C's of finding your fit: care, comfort, and consistency. And it is very on brand for you to talk about, those 3 things. How are you going to develop me? How are you going to care for me? What's my experience really going to be like? And can I gauge the consistency of whether or not you're going to do it beyond the sales pitch? Ness is continuing to crush life. I know I already made mention in the intro about your new position, your alma mater at Marian Central Catholic. So I wish you the best of luck as you continue building there. Always a pleasure catching up with you, Ness. Good to see you. And I don't know where you'll be, in a different continent probably next week, but enjoy your continued, in my perspective, just owning your early to mid 20s. Just keep it up. It seems very fun, and I hope you keep enjoying it.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. And thank you for trusting me to help you through this process and this amazing experience that you're challenging yourself with, and allowing me to come on here today and just kind of be me, and always for your support too. I got your back too.
That's going to do it for another episode of the Nail the Recruiting Process podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you got something out of today's podcast. If you'd like to learn more about anything related to Nail the Recruiting Process, the book, my work, maybe wanting to work with me one-on-one, anything under the sun, you're going to visit www.nailtherecruitingprocess.com. If you'd like to follow me on social media, you can follow me at Nail the Recruiting Process on Instagram, or at Jared the Coach on Twitter and TikTok. Both of those handles are just one word, no characters, no spaces. If you'd like to ask something of me directly, if you'd like a question that maybe you want answered on a future podcast, or if you have an idea for something we should talk about in a future episode, please reach out to me via email. I would love to hear from you. My email address is recruitinggear@gmail.com. That's the word recruiting, then the word gear combined. recruitinggear@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope to catch you next time.